Imagine this. It's March 2025 in a small Colombian town called Buga, the kind of place where the days feel slow and life moves in rhythms that seem untouched by the chaos of the wider world. And yet, in the skies above that quiet town, something appeared, something that shouldn't exist. A metallic sphere about the size of a bowling ball drifted into view, perfectly smooth, gleaming in the sunlight. Its surface seemed almost unreal. There were no seams, no welds, no marks of human construction, just a flawless silver shell that floated silently before finally resting in a field as though it had chosen its landing spot. Local residents were the first to find it. Children playing in the fields noticed it shining among the grass, and soon the entire town had gathered. At first, many assumed it was just some kind of debris, perhaps a fallen satellite or experimental object. But when they tried to lift it, the weight was strange. It wasn't heavy in the way one would expect. For something its size, just 4.5 pounds, it felt almost too light yet perfectly balanced. And the moment sunlight touched it, the sphere seemed to hum faintly, like a whisper just below the edge of hearing. Scientists were quickly brought in. What they discovered would ignite one of the strangest mysteries in modern history. X-ray scans revealed something almost impossible. Inside 3 concentric metal layers and 9 tiny microspheres suspended in perfect geometric patterns. Not random, not fractured, but intentional, designed. And then, the markings. The surface of the sphere wasn't completely smooth after all. Subtle etchings, like glyphs, stretched across the shell. They weren't letters. They weren't numbers, and no known culture or language matched them. At first, researchers thought they might be purely decorative, but then someone noticed the patterns aligned with acoustic frequencies. This is where the story takes its first unsettling turn. During testing, researchers played a series of low-frequency hums in the laboratory just to see if the sphere would react. And it did. Almost instantly, the object began to pulse with a faint blue light. Not randomly, but in sync with the tones. With each vibration of sound, the sphere seemed to answer. Its glow deepened. Its surface shimmered. And in that moment, it no longer looked like a passive artifact. It looked like it was listening. What happened next was even more shocking. One of the microspheres inside the object shifted. It moved, as though the sound had triggered a mechanism, or perhaps a signal. The entire lab fell silent. They weren't looking at a relic anymore. They were looking at a machine, something alive, something waiting. And this was only the beginning, because what no one expected was how far back this mystery stretched into human history. After the sphere's first reaction to sound, scientists realized they were not simply studying a dead object. They were standing before something responsive, something that almost behaved like an intelligence waiting to be awakened. But then came a discovery that made the entire situation far stranger and far older. Deep inside the Vatican archives, researchers uncovered a 17th century Jesuit map drawn by missionaries who had traveled across South America. On this faded parchment were 9 markings, 9 circles, connected by faint lines that looked less like decoration and more like instructions. In the margins, the words spoke of spheres of arrival. When modern cartographers compared the old map to current geography, one of those marked circles aligned exactly with the site in Buga, Colombia, where the metallic sphere had landed in 2025. It was no coincidence. And if one location matched, then what of the others? Could there be more of these objects hidden beneath jungle canopies, desert sands, or ocean waves? The thought was chilling. This was no random accident. The object in Colombia was part of a network. The markings on the sphere itself suddenly began to make more sense. They weren't symbols. They weren't text. They were sound frequencies encoded into geometry, like a lock waiting for the right acoustic key. When aligned with the map's coordinates, the glyphs seemed to form a pattern that matched the Earth's ley lines, those ancient pathways of energy that civilizations from Stonehenge to the Nazca lines have aligned their monuments with. But if the map was right, then the Bugosphere was not alone. Across the globe, in places where myths of sky stones and fallen stars linger in folklore, the coordinates pointed to possible hiding spots of similar objects. One in the mountains of Peru, another deep in the Sahara Desert, a third in the frozen reaches of Siberia, and perhaps even beneath the Pacific Ocean. It meant humanity may have been sharing this planet with a silent network of hidden machines for centuries, maybe millennia. Yet, the object in Colombia wasn't just content to sit silently anymore. After being stimulated by sound, it seemed more active. The faint humming could sometimes be heard even when the lab was silent. Sensitive instruments detected electromagnetic pulses radiating from its shell, so subtle they slipped past casual detection, but strong enough to interfere with GPS signals and disrupt compasses. Animals behaved strangely around it too. Dogs barked without cause. Birds avoided the skies overhead. Farmers swore their cattle refused to graze near the site where it had first landed. Piece by piece, the mystery grew. An object from nowhere, a map centuries old, a web of possible connections across the Earth. And now, evidence that the sphere wasn't just passive, it was communicating. The question that haunted every scientist working on the project was this: communicating with whom? At first, the scientists thought the markings on the sphere were decorative, simple etchings, maybe meant to give it some symbolic identity. But then came the breakthrough. Those glyphs weren't random at all. They were angles, frequencies, encoded geometry. When a team of acoustic specialists played low-frequency sounds aligned with those markings, the impossible happened. The sphere moved. It started with a faint vibration, subtle enough that only the instruments caught it. But then, as the frequencies were adjusted, the entire object pulsed. A dull hum rose from within, matching the tones in a way that made it feel alive, as though it wasn't just reacting, it was listening. And then came the light. A soft blue glow seeped from beneath its flawless surface, not from any crack or seam, but as if the entire sphere was shifting into a new state of being. Engineers swore the mass of the object changed ever so slightly, measurable only with the most sensitive scales. Some claimed it grew heavier under certain tones, as if gravity itself was bending around it. The moment that silenced the entire lab came when one of the internal microspheres, those perfectly arranged inner components, visible only through advanced scans, shifted. It moved out of alignment, almost as if it had unlocked from a resting position. This was no inert relic. It was a mechanism, a machine. But what was it waiting for? Some researchers began to speculate. Perhaps these frequencies were a kind of language, not words as we know them, but vibrations that acted as keys. Each hum, each tone might be opening a step in a sequence, one that had been dormant for centuries or longer, until now. And here is where the unease deepened. If sound could wake it, could sound also command it? Was it listening to us or listening for someone else? What's more, the glyphs seemed to suggest more than simple tones. By running simulations, scientists noticed that the frequency patterns lined up with mathematical ratios often found in planetary orbits. Jupiter's moons, Saturn's rings, the very cycles of the Earth and Moon. It was as if the sphere was tuned not just to music, but to the rhythms of the cosmos itself. Night after night, experiments continued. Some tones brought silence. Others triggered vibrations strong enough to make lab equipment rattle. One sequence even caused nearby computers to freeze, their memory wiped as if by an invisible surge of energy. To the casual observer, it might look like coincidence. But to the people standing there, watching, it felt like the sphere was responding with intent. And if this was only one object, in one place, what might the others, if they truly existed, be capable of when awakened together? The map from the Vatican no longer seemed like ancient superstition. It felt like a manual, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The more they listened, the more a chilling thought grew impossible to ignore. Maybe the sphere wasn't just reacting to sound. Maybe it was waiting for a voice it already knew. At first, the changes were subtle. A compass needle twitching in the hands of a technician. A drone camera drifting slightly off course, its GPS losing lock for a few seconds at a time. Small things, easy to dismiss as coincidence. But as the days turned into weeks, the disturbances grew harder to ignore. Magnetometers near the lab recorded sudden spikes, fluctuations that couldn't be traced to storms on the Sunday. In fact, the data seemed to show pulses, localized bursts of magnetism, aligned with the same rhythms the sphere had responded to during sound experiments. It was as if the object wasn't just listening, but speaking back in a language made of electromagnetic whispers. Animals near the site began acting strangely. Birds avoided the airspace above the facility. Dogs barked furiously in the middle of the night, staring at nothing. Farmers claimed their cattle refused to cross certain fields, choosing long detours around invisible boundaries. To some, this sounded like folklore. To the scientists watching the data screens, it looked like proof. The sphere was projecting something, fields, barriers, maybe even signals that shaped the world around it. And then came the moment that made the story impossible to contain. A technician leaked a video. It showed the sphere sitting in its containment cradle, bathed in low-frequency sound tests. For hours it had done little more than hum and glow softly. But then, without warning, it split. Not cracked, not shattered, split. An invisible seam revealed itself, peeling open like a blooming flower. From within, a pale inner light spilled into the room, cold and steady, with a resonance that rattled every piece of metal nearby. The video captured the sound too, a tone unlike anything man-made. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated in the bones of anyone who listened. The sphere had opened. No mechanism was visible, no hinges, no moving parts. Just an impossibly seamless divide, as if the object had decided on its own to reveal a deeper layer. For a moment, faint geometric shapes could be seen inside, glowing faintly. Some described them as patterns of stars. Others swore they saw symbols, shifting too quickly to understand. And then, just as suddenly, it closed. The seam vanished. The glow faded, and the sphere returned to its perfect, lifeless form. The video spread across the internet in hours. Governments denied its authenticity. Scientists argued over whether it was CGI, but those who had been in the room swore to what they saw. The Bugosphere had revealed something meant to be hidden. The debate split the scientific world. Some insisted it was proof of an ancient artifact, designed to respond only when Earth reached a certain level of understanding. Others feared it was something worse, an alarm, a beacon, perhaps even a test. What unsettled everyone most was the question no one could shake. If this was only one of 9 spheres, what would happen if all of them opened at once? For months, researchers tried to make sense of what the sphere's opening meant. But the real breakthrough didn't come from physics or chemistry or cutting-edge quantum labs. It came from history, deep in the Vatican archives, where sunlight rarely touches the shelves. A Jesuit scholar stumbled across a 17th century map. At first glance, it looked like any old missionary chart ink faded, parchment frayed, coastlines sketched in ways that barely resemble the precision of modern maps. But scattered across it were 9 strange symbols, perfect circles, each one drawn with care, positioned with uncanny accuracy along major land masses. And beside them, a phrase in archaic Latin, orbs adventus, the spheres of arrival. When coordinates were translated to modern grids, one location aligned perfectly with the discovery site in Buga, Colombia. Another matched an uninhabited desert plateau in Namibia. A third, eerily, corresponded to a remote Himalayan valley spoken of in Tibetan legend as the Echoing Basin. The other 6 were spread across the globe from the frozen wastelands of Antarctica to the islands of Polynesia, each place long associated with myths of glowing stones or divine arrivals. For skeptics, the coincidence was too convenient. For others, it was confirmation. The Bugosphere was not alone. Archaeologists pored over the documents. Folklorists compared them to stories whispered through generations. In South America, indigenous traditions told of singing stones that guided hunters through fog. In Africa, shamans spoke of iron fruits that fell from the heavens long before colonists arrived. In Asia, ancient temples bore carvings of spheres encircled by waves of light, always depicted in groups of 9. It was as if humanity had been leaving breadcrumbs for itself, fragments of memory describing artifacts no one alive had ever seen until now. But what unsettled researchers most was the alignment. Every one of the 9 mapped sites sat precisely along what geophysicists call ley lines, invisible paths of geomagnetic energy, running like veins through the earth. These weren't random placements. They were part of a design, and if that design was intentional, then the Bugosphere was a single piece of a puzzle far larger than anyone had imagined. Some speculated the spheres were beacons tuned to the Earth's energy grid, waiting for the right trigger. Others believed they were vaults, storage devices holding knowledge too dangerous or too precious to release all at once. A darker theory suggested they were sentinels, part of a monitoring system left here long ago, designed to wake only when humanity reached a certain threshold. The Vatican map's discovery sparked a quiet scramble among governments. Teams were dispatched disguised as geological surveys, climate expeditions, and archaeological digs to the other coordinates. Rumors began to trickle back of military convoys in the desert, of restricted airspace over valleys no one cared about before, of scientists disappearing after speaking publicly about anomalous readings. But through all the secrecy, one truth became harder and harder to ignore. The Bugosphere was not unique. It was part of a network. And if one sphere could respond to sound, to vibration, to human curiosity, what would happen if 2 spheres responded together, or 3, or all 9? The idea haunted every late-night discussion, every closed-door briefing. Because if the spheres were connected, then activating one might not just wake the others. It might trigger the network as a whole. And no one, not the scientists, not the governments, not the religious scholars knew what that would mean for the world. When the first samples of the sphere's surface were tested, scientists expected to find something simple: iron, nickel, maybe an exotic alloy, but still within the boundaries of human understanding. Instead, what they found bent the rules of physics itself. Under standard laboratory conditions, the surface behaved like any other ultra-refined metal: reflective, hard, resistant to scratches. But when chilled to extreme cold, something bizarre happened. The sphere gained mass, not weight, not density fluctuations. From contraction, its actual mass increased. A 4.5-pound sphere suddenly weighed 5 pounds, then 6, and as soon as it warmed back to room temperature, it returned to its original weight as if nothing had happened. The data was checked, rechecked, and then checked again. No material on Earth behaves this way. Mass doesn't just appear and disappear. But here, in a secure underground lab, it was happening again and again. More tests followed. When exposed to controlled heat, the surface became more flexible, almost soft, absorbing energy without breaking. When exposed to vibration, the glyph-like markings began to shimmer, not as symbols, but as living responses. It was as if the object wasn't just metal, it was something else entirely, something adaptive, something alive. The term whispered in research halls became programmable matter, but not in the speculative way humans had theorized. This was programmable matter perfected, matter that responded to its environment, that could shift properties depending on stimulus, that might even store information within its very structure. Imagine steel that becomes stronger under stress, or aluminum that thickens itself when cut. Imagine a bridge that heals its own cracks, or a spacecraft that reshapes its hull in response to radiation. The sphere wasn't an artifact in the way we usually think of artifacts. It was a demonstration, a sample of a material that defies the line between machine and organism. And this is where the term living metal was born. Because some scientists began to ask, what if the Bugosphere isn't just an object? What if it is an entity? Not alive in the way we think of plants or animals, but alive in the way fire is alive, in the way a storm moves with intent, in the way intelligence doesn't always need to breathe or bleed. One metallurgist described it like this: it's not a rock, it's not a tool, it's a system, a self-aware system. Every atom seems to know what its neighbor is doing. And then came the strangest test of all. A low-voltage current was passed through the sphere's surface. Immediately, the glyphs lit up faintly, glowing a soft blue. The patterns shifted slowly at first, then faster until they resembled something almost like an oscillating code. Not words, not numbers, something deeper. When the current was stopped, the glow remained for nearly 30 seconds before fading, as if the object had stored the energy and was choosing how to release it. Some began to speculate. Could the sphere be not just a container, but a processor? Could it hold data, memories, or even consciousness in a way we can't comprehend? And, if so, whose? The first people to notice the environmental effects weren't scientists in lab coats. They were the locals, farmers, fishermen, people who lived their whole lives around Buga, Colombia. They described strange nights when their GPS devices spun in circles, compasses pointed nowhere, and cell signals dropped into silence. Chickens refused to roost. Dogs barked at empty air. Horses stamped nervously, pulling away from the field where the sphere had first appeared. At first, no one connected these disturbances to the metallic object. But then, the researchers arrived. With every piece of equipment, they set up magnetometers, field probes, radio receivers. The evidence grew stronger. The sphere was not inert. It was leaking something invisible. Every time it pulsed in response to sound or vibration, the air itself seemed to ripple. Instruments picked up geomagnetic fluctuations so sharp that even hardened specialists blinked in disbelief. It was as though a localized storm of magnetism was unfolding. But without clouds, without lightning, just a silent field that bent reality. Pilots flying over the region reported bizarre compass behavior, their navigational equipment swinging wildly before snapping back to normal once they left the area. Even satellites in low Earth orbit logged subtle anomalies. as if the sphere's influence stretched far beyond its physical size. The effects weren't just mechanical, they were biological. Birds migrating across the region swerved off course. Schools of fish darted in frantic patterns near the river. Farmers swore that plants near the site grew in twisted, asymmetrical shapes. It was as if the earth itself was warping under the invisible shadow of the sphere. And yet, when measurements were repeated days later, the disturbances were gone only to return without warning. The pattern seemed deliberate, almost like the sphere was choosing when to project its fields. One late-night test became legendary among the research team. A technician played one of the low-frequency tones known to trigger a response. Immediately, the magnetometers spiked, power flickered, and, for a brief moment, every digital screen in the camp displayed static. At the same instant, the sphere split along its seam with a blinding blue glow, and animals in the valley below let out a unified cry of alarm. Then, silence. The glow faded, instruments calmed. The night returned to stillness, but the researchers were shaken. Because in those few seconds, it felt as if the sphere wasn't just reacting, it was broadcasting. Theorists began to suggest that the object might be testing its environment, probing, sending out electromagnetic ripples like sonar, mapping the world around it in ways our technology can barely comprehend. If true, this meant the Bugosphere wasn't waiting passively, it was scanning. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was calling. Long before satellites, long before telescopes, long before the word quantum was ever whispered in a lab, someone had already mapped the spheres. Hidden deep within the Vatican archives, in brittle leather-bound volumes written by Jesuit explorers of the 1600s, was a peculiar sketch, a map not of borders, not of kingdoms, but of alignments. It marked 9 strange circles scattered across the globe, 9 points the Jesuits referred to cryptically as the spheres of arrival. For centuries, historians dismissed these as symbolic, maybe mystical, until 2025, when researchers noticed one of the map's coordinates lined up exactly with the site in Buga, Colombia. The implication was staggering. If the map was accurate, it suggested 2 things. First, that the Bugosphere was not unique. Second, that knowledge of these objects, whatever they are, predates modern history by at least 400 years. But the alignments didn't stop there. Other locations marked on the map intersected with known archaeological enigmas. The Nazca lines in Peru, the megalithic ruins of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, the mysterious dolmens of southern France, even parts of Egypt's desert beyond the Nile. Were the Jesuits simply recording folklore, or did they have access to knowledge long since forgotten? Modern geospatial analysis only deepened the mystery. When the coordinates of the 9 spheres were plotted onto digital maps, researchers noticed something uncanny. They aligned with known ley lines, those supposed energy pathways crisscrossing the Earth, often linking ancient monuments, temples, and sacred sites. In other words, if the map is to be believed, the spheres were deliberately placed in connection with Earth's hidden grid, a network, a system, perhaps designed to activate together. The Bugosphere, then, might not be an isolated relic, but a single node in a vast planetary machine. Imagine it. 9 perfectly engineered artifacts buried in time, silently waiting across continents. One awakens in Colombia. What happens if another responds in Egypt, or Bolivia, or under the sands of some forgotten coastline? The idea unsettled even the most hardened skeptics. Because if one sphere could already bend magnetic fields, glow with light, and respond to sound, what might 9 of them do in unison? Would they create a resonance so powerful it could ripple through Earth itself? Would they act as beacons, summoning whatever or whoever placed them here? No one has the answers, only the silence of the map and the haunting realization that someone hundreds of years ago already knew. From the outside, the Bugosphere looked simple, like a polished ornament that could sit quietly on a shelf. But the deeper scientists probed, the stranger it became. Under thermal testing, something impossible happened. Most metals contract when cooled, but the sphere, it gained weight. Instruments showed its mass increased under extreme cold, as though something inside it was pulling matter from nowhere. When heated, instead of expanding, its surface developed strange ripples, waves that looked alive, moving across its skin like muscle beneath flesh. This was the first hint that the sphere might not be inert, it might be adaptive. Some called it living metal, not alive in the sense of lungs and blood, but in the sense of responsiveness, matter designed to evolve with its environment. If so, the Bugosphere wasn't just an artifact, it was an organism of metal, a hybrid between machine and life. The term that surfaced again and again in classified reports was programmable matter. Imagine atoms arranged like code, rearranging themselves, depending on instructions buried in their structure. What we call steel or titanium suddenly becomes flexible, aware, even self-healing. If this is true, then every ripple across the sphere's surface was not random. It was a language, a pulse, a signal encoded into its very being. And then came the experiment that changed everything. When exposed to a deep, steady hum, just a single tone stretched across minutes, the sphere didn't just vibrate. Its surface opened. No crack, no break, but a smooth shifting seam that revealed a faint glow inside. Inside that glow was movement, not wires, not gears, but something far more organic. Pulsing orbs, shifting microspheres, arranged in perfect geometry like organs within a body. Some rotated, some pulsed faint light, and for a brief moment the sensors picked up a frequency that resembled a heartbeat. It wasn't alive in the way we know, but it wasn't dead either. The living metal hypothesis suddenly felt too small. What if the sphere was a vessel not for fuel, not for data, but for intelligence itself? What if it was a mind, suspended inside a shell of impossible alloy, waiting centuries for the right sound, the right touch, the right moment to wake up? And if it was alive, then the question shifted from what is it to who is it? It started as a whisper on a small Colombian forum posted by someone who claimed to live near the excavation site. A shaky video just under 2 minutes long. At first, it showed nothing but the silver orb sitting silently on a lab table, illuminated by sterile white light. But then something happened. Without warning, the sphere shifted. Not violently, not with force, but with a grace that seemed deliberate. Its smooth skin rippled, folding in on itself, and then a seam appeared where none had ever existed. The object opened from within. Light spilled out, not blinding, not harsh, but a deep pulsing glow. Blue and silver intertwined like liquid electricity, flowing out in slow, rhythmic waves. The glow wasn't random. It pulsed in patterns, like a code, like breathing. And underneath it all, a low hum vibrated, too faint for the human ear, but captured on the recording. For exactly 23 seconds, the sphere revealed its interior. Inside, you could see the microspheres shifting, moving into new positions with eerie precision. Some glowed faintly, others rotated like planets in miniature orbit. It was as though the sphere was reorganizing itself in response to being watched. And then, just as silently as it opened, it closed. The seam vanished. The glow disappeared. The room returned to sterile silence. The video should have been dismissed as a hoax. But then came the problem. Experts began analyzing the audio track, and that faint hum, it wasn't random background noise. It was a frequency 7.83 Hertz, the exact same frequency as the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. In other words, the sphere was in sync with the planet itself. Governments scrambled to contain the footage. But as always, the internet is faster than secrecy. Within hours, it spread across encrypted channels, re-uploads, and dark web forums. Conspiracy theorists called it proof of alien intelligence. Skeptics called it a trick of light and editing. But those who study the raw file saw something harder to dismiss: data embedded in the video frames themselves. Hidden patterns, pixel-level distortions that, when decoded, resembled star maps. Star maps pointing not to our galaxy, but beyond. Suddenly, the Bugosphere wasn't just a mystery. It was a message, a beacon, a map to somewhere else. And if the viral video was genuine, then the question was no longer, what is the sphere? But what has it just told us? When the viral video reached mainstream channels, it wasn't just curious minds watching. Inside secured conference rooms in Washington, Geneva, and Beijing, intelligence agencies replayed the clip frame by frame, dissecting every flicker of light, every resonance in the audio. The conclusion, though unspoken, was clear. The Bugosphere wasn't just an artifact, it was active. And if it could sync itself with Earth's magnetic heartbeat, then it wasn't inert, it was aware. The first reaction was predictable containment. The Colombian government was pressured to silence local witnesses. Research staff at the lab were quietly replaced. International organizations issued carefully worded denials, calling the footage digitally altered and urging the public not to jump to conclusions. But the silence from those in power only fueled suspicion. Meanwhile, leaks began to connect the dots. A Vatican archivist, anonymous but credible, revealed the existence of maps drawn by Jesuit scholars in the 1600s. Maps showing 9 points across Earth, marked with cryptic symbols and described as spheres of arrival. The location in Colombia wasn't just random, it was predicted centuries ago. Archaeologists noted something chilling. Those 9 points weren't just scattered locations. They aligned perfectly with ancient ley lines, energy pathways that crisscrossed the globe. From Machu Picchu to the pyramids of Egypt, from Easter Island to Angkor Wat, the coordinates connected humanity's most mysterious monuments. Could it be coincidence? Or had these sites been chosen long ago because of their connection to something greater, something waiting to be revealed? The sphere in Colombia was no longer an isolated event. It might be one piece of a larger puzzle, a global network hidden in plain sight for centuries. And now, with one sphere awake, scientists fear the others might not stay silent for long. The public asks the obvious question: if this is the first to open, who or what controls the countdown for the rest? As researchers continue to test the sphere, one observation unsettled them more than anything else. The material wasn't behaving like ordinary metal. Metals, as we know them, expand when heated and contract when cooled. But this was different. When scientists placed the Bugosphere under extreme cold, instead of shrinking, its mass actually increased. Instruments recorded the object becoming heavier not by a fraction, but by measurable, repeatable amounts. It was as if the sphere was drinking in the cold, absorbing it like fuel. And then came the opposite test heat. Instead of softening, the sphere hardened. Its resistance to deformation rose exponentially. At certain thresholds, sensors detected what could only be described as phase shift behavior. The metal wasn't melting, it wasn't cracking. It was changing its very nature, almost like it had modes, switching between different states on command. That led to the phrase, whispered among the team, living metal. Not alive in the biological sense, not something you could wound or kill, but alive in the sense of adaptation, responsive, intelligent at a structural level. The sphere wasn't just a container, it was a participant. What unsettled the researchers most was the sphere's apparent ability to learn. Each time they played specific sound frequencies, the responses grew more refined. The blue glow sharpened, the vibrations aligned more precisely with the input. When the same sound was replayed, the sphere didn't just repeat its earlier response, it improved it. It was almost as if the sphere was training itself, adjusting to human probing, teaching itself how to respond more efficiently. One researcher quietly suggested it might be a form of programmable matter, a concept still largely theoretical in human science. Matter designed to reconfigure itself, to hold data, to act as memory. If true, the Bugosphere wasn't just storing information, it might be processing it, evolving in real time. And then came the glyphs. Earlier dismissed as strange markings, they began to take on new meaning. When scanned under different electromagnetic wavelengths, the glyphs didn't remain static. They shifted, not visually, but in the way they resonated with light. At infrared frequencies, the markings behaved like microcircuits. At ultraviolet, they reflected patterns resembling acoustic signatures. The horrifying implication was that the surface itself was dynamic and interface, perhaps waiting for the right code to unlock its deeper functions. The sphere was no longer an artifact to study. It was a dialogue waiting to happen, and the fear among scientists wasn't just what it might reveal, but whether we were ready to hear it. Because the last thing anyone wanted to admit was this: if the sphere was intelligent, then its silence up until now wasn't because it couldn't respond. It was because it was waiting. If the Bugosphere was strange in its construction, it was the historical connection that made it terrifying. A Jesuit archive in the Vatican, long forgotten, contained a map dating back to the 1600s. On that brittle parchment were 9 markings spread across the world, each marked with a simple Latin phrase, Sphere Adventus. Translated, it means the spheres of arrival. One of those points aligned perfectly with Buga, Colombia, the exact site of the Bugosphere's discovery. At first, it was easy to dismiss as coincidence. Ancient cartographers often drew symbolic diagrams, sometimes spiritual rather than literal. But the more scholars examined the alignment, the harder it became to explain away. Each of the 9 points corresponded not to random locations, but to places already steeped in mystery. One was near the Nazca lines of Peru, etched into the desert floor with precision only visible from above. Another lay in Egypt, within walking distance of the Giza Plateau. One aligned with Angkor Wat in Cambodia, its temples famously patterned after the stars. The possibility took shape slowly, reluctantly. What if these sites weren't just spiritual or architectural marvels? What if they were chosen because they resonated with the same kind of energy the Bugosphere was now responding to? The sphere's glyphs, when studied, seem to pulse in resonance with certain angles of the Earth's magnetic field. And when researchers cross-checked those alignments with ancient ley lines, the supposed invisible pathways of energy connecting sacred sites, they found patterns too precise to ignore. It was as if someone or something mapped the Earth thousands of years ago and planted these artifacts in places that could communicate with one another across vast distances. The chilling thought, if the Bugosphere was just one, then 8 more might still be out there. Some buried, some hidden, some perhaps already found and concealed. And then came the most unnerving twist. When frequencies were played near the Bugosphere that matched its glyph signatures, sensors detected faint magnetic echoes. But those echoes weren't local, they were global. They came from other coordinates far away, suggesting the sphere wasn't alone. It was listening, it was calling. And somewhere, something might be answering back. At first, the changes were subtle. A compass needle quivered near the sphere, drifting just a fraction of a degree off true north. A GPS unit rebooted without warning. An intern's smartwatch went blank and refused to turn on again until it was carried miles away. But over the next weeks, the disturbances grew harder to dismiss. Cows grazing near Buga refused to go within 100 meters of the sphere's containment site. Dogs barked endlessly in its direction, their hair standing on end. Birds wheeled in circles above the jungle canopy and then fled as if driven by an unseen force. Even insects seemed to avoid it, leaving the grass around its resting place eerily silent. Locals spoke of headaches, dizziness, even strange dreams after walking near the restricted zone. Some swore they felt a vibration in their bones, a low hum too deep to hear but impossible to ignore. The research team measured electromagnetic fields radiating from the object fields that shifted unpredictably, pulsing like a heartbeat. What unsettled them most was the precision. These weren't random waves of interference. The frequencies fluctuated in repeating intervals, timed almost like language. A video that briefly leaked before being deleted showed the sphere glowing faintly in the night, casting ripples of blue light across the ground. One researcher stood too close and collapsed, momentarily unresponsive, only to later describe an overwhelming flood of images, patterns, shapes, and something like voices layered within the light. And then came the anomaly no one could explain. One morning, the team discovered that a ring of laptops left charging overnight had all synchronized. Despite different brands, different operating systems, and no network connection, each screen displayed the same frozen image, a series of concentric circles surrounding 9 dots. The pattern was identical to the glyphs carved into the Bugosphere. It was as if the object had reached out not through wires, not through signals, but directly into the electronics themselves, rewriting them, commanding them to echo its message. The implications were staggering. If the sphere could project influence over machines with such precision, what else could it reach? Satellites? Power grids? Human minds? The researchers agreed on one point. The field was not passive. It was waking up. It happened on a quiet evening just after sunset. The research facility's power flickered once, then twice, before stabilizing. At first, no one connected it to the sphere. Power outages were common in the Colombian countryside. But then the air changed. A faint vibration filled the walls, like the hum of a distant engine, too deep to be mechanical. Inside the containment chamber, the Bugosphere began to glow, not with the soft flickers they'd seen before, but with a steady, pulsating light. The blue hue deepened into silver, then into a strange shade of white that seemed less like illumination and more like space itself bending into visibility. Witnesses later said the glow wasn't just seen, it was felt. It pressed against the skin like invisible waves, vibrating inside bone and blood. Suddenly, without a sound, the sphere shifted. Along an invisible seam, it split open like a blooming flower. The panels of its flawless surface peeled back in perfect symmetry, revealing a hollow core, and inside that core, the 9 microspheres were moving, slowly at first, then in synchronized rhythm, orbiting each other like a miniature solar system. Their movements created overlapping spirals of light shapes that resembled constellations, ancient star maps traced across the chamber walls. Then came the resonance. A deep harmonic tone filled the air, not from speakers, not from any machine, but from the object itself. It was low, steady, and layered, as if multiple voices were singing in unison. Those who stood closest later described a feeling as though the sound was not heard with their ears, but directly inside their mind. On the floor, sensors went haywire. electromagnetic spikes, radiation surges, gravitational anomalies all firing at once. One researcher stumbled backward as their smartwatch displayed numbers that made no sense. Distances measured in light years, timestamps in negative years. And yet, amid the chaos, there was an undeniable pattern. The 9 spheres aligned, paused, and projected a burst of light straight into the ceiling. For a fraction of a second, the glow coalesced into a shape. 9 dots, connected by luminous lines. A network, a map. But this map was not of Earth, nor even of the solar system. The arrangement stretched far beyond, pointing toward coordinates deep in interstellar space. The team realized they weren't watching random energy, they were watching a message unfold. And then the impossible happened. One of the 9 inner spheres broke formation and moved toward the opening. It hovered for a moment in the air, suspended between gravity and weightlessness, glowing brighter than the rest. Slowly, deliberately, it descended toward the floor, landing gently at the feet of the lead researcher. The original sphere, the Bugosphere, remained open, its core still glowing. But now, part of it had stepped into our world. No one dared touch it. No one spoke. For the first time, the scientists admitted to themselves what they had whispered for weeks. This wasn't just an artifact. It wasn't just technology. It was alive. The smaller sphere, still glowing, faintly rested on the floor like a dropped pearl. Its light was steady, not blinding, almost patient. As if waiting, the lead researcher, Dr. Alvarez, crouched near it but dared not touch it. His voice broke the silence. "What if it's asking us something?" No one answered. Their instruments kept spiking, scribbling nonsense data across every monitor. Some readings suggested the object weighed nothing. Others said it was heavier than lead. Both impossible. The room split into factions almost instantly. One group insisted it had to be contained. They argued that bringing it here, letting it move on its own, had crossed into danger. "This could be a Trojan horse," one said. "We don't know if it's carrying radiation, pathogens, or something worse." Another group argued the opposite. "This is a gift." The object had responded to sound, it had responded to frequency, and now it had chosen to step out. If it meant harm, "Doctor," Alvarez whispered, "it had 1,000 chances already." But instead, it gave us this. The argument swelled. Fear on one side, wonder on the other. And then the sphere itself intervened. As if aware of the conflict, it shifted again. A soft hum filled the chamber, low and resonant, vibrating in their chests. On its smooth surface, faint patterns appeared, glowing glyphs like those etched into the parent sphere. Except these were different. They moved. Not static symbols, but flowing streams of light sliding into shapes that resembled sound waves, frequency curves, mathematical spirals, a universal language, numbers, rhythm, resonance. Dr. Alvarez froze, then grabbed his tablet. "It's showing us instructions." The glyphs pulsed faster, syncing with the frequency of the hum. The room quieted as the scientists realized They were not arguing with each other anymore. They were watching something speak. The symbols formed what looked like a sequence, 9 positions, each glowing in turn, each paired with a frequency wave. The team quickly recognized the sequence matched the movement of the inner microspheres they had seen orbiting earlier. It was teaching them how to communicate, or worse, how to unlock something bigger. The room fell silent again, but not from fear this time, from awe. They had spent weeks trying to understand this artifact, and now it was reaching back. Not passive, not random, interactive, alive, and the question loomed larger than ever. If we follow the instructions, what happens next? The smaller sphere's glyphs pulsed in steady rhythm, each glow lining up with a tone, like sheet music written in light. For a long time, nobody dared to act. The lab was silent except for the low hum resonating from the object itself. Finally, Dr. Alvarez broke the silence. "If this is communication," he whispered, "we're standing on the edge of the first real dialogue humanity has ever had with something not of Earth." Against protests, he raised a calibrated acoustic emitter, dialing it to match the frequency curves on the glowing glyphs. The entire team held their breath as he pressed play. The lab filled with a deep, resonant hum, one that seemed to vibrate in their bones. The smaller sphere responded instantly. Its glow brightened, patterns racing across its surface in a cascade of geometric shapes. The larger parent sphere, the one that had remained dormant, subtly shifted. Seamless as glass, its surface rippled like water. A hairline seam appeared, not cut, not forced, but as if the object itself decided to open. The team staggered back. Inside, light poured out, not harsh, not blinding, but soft, layered, almost liquid. Within it, 9 microspheres floated in perfect alignment, orbiting each other with impossible precision. One by one, the smaller spheres pulsed, syncing with the tones played from the emitter. And then the hum in the room changed. It wasn't just the machine anymore. The artifact was singing back. It was a dialogue, a call, and response. The researchers weren't just sending a signal, they were receiving one. On the monitors, every instrument went haywire again. Magnetic fields spiked, temperature readings dropped, a strong vibration coursed through the concrete floor, and then, impossibly, images appeared. Not on the monitors, but in the air above the glowing artifact. Flickers of light, like holograms, shimmering into forms. Shapes of constellations familiar, yet skewed. Galaxies, spirals, nebulae, and then maps. The team recognized one immediately. Earth. Another, Mars. A third, unknown. A dark star system no one could match in any database. The glyphs on the sphere pulsed faster, projecting coordinates across the lab like ancient cartography married to quantum code. "This isn't just a communication," Dr. Alvarez whispered, his face pale. "It's a roadmap. But to what? A destination? A network? A warning? No one could say. The only certainty was this: the Bugosphere wasn't finished. It had only just started to open its secrets. And humanity had just pressed yes on the first contact invitation it may never be able to take back. The holograms hovered above the sphere, flickering between coordinates, constellations, and strange coded glyphs that none of the world's most advanced AI systems could fully decipher. The only certainty was that one of the highlighted points matched Earth, another matched Mars, and the third was completely unknown. It wasn't in any star chart, not visible to the Webb telescope, not even recorded in millennia of human sky watching. Yet here it was, clear and deliberate, a destination. Governments scrambled the moment the leak went public. The US, China, Russia, and Europe issued rapid conflicting statements, none admitting possession of the sphere, yet all promising investigations. Satellite reconnaissance over Colombia spiked, and strange military convoys were seen moving through the forests where the sphere first appeared. Meanwhile, online forums lit up with theories. Some claimed the unknown star was the true home of the artifact's creators. Others insisted it was a warning star about to collapse, sending death across space. And a quieter, more chilling theory emerged. Maybe it wasn't a destination at all. Maybe it was a countdown. Part 19. The Fracture Point. Inside the private research lab, chaos reigned. The Bugosphere began responding on its own, without input, pulsing faster, as if it sensed the growing tension outside. Its holograms became sharper, showing not just stars but structures. Gigantic rings surrounding suns, planetary surfaces scarred with geometric patterns, a web-like lattice stretching between systems what looked like a cosmic network. Then came the sound. Not from the emitters, not from any human device, but from the sphere itself. A deep, resonant tone that shook the walls and rattled bones. Cameras caught it. The 9 microspheres inside the object had begun spinning faster, aligning into new patterns. That's when Dr. Alvarez realized the truth. "These aren't just maps," he whispered. "This is a log, and we've just started turning the key." Part 20. The Opening. The lab's instruments spiked off the charts. Temperatures dropped 10 degrees in under a minute. Outside, the sky over Colombia glowed faintly blue, visible for miles. Locals flooded social media with videos of the phenomenon, light rippling through the clouds in geometric pulses. The sphere split open again, wider this time, revealing an interior glow so intricate it looked alive. Within, threads of light stretched like veins across a surface of liquid metal. At its core, the 9th microsphere finally unlocked from its orbit, rising slowly into the air. The team stood frozen as it projected an image unlike anything before. A face. Not human, not animal, not entirely definable, but a presence watching, shifting, almost sculpted from light itself. And then came the voice. Not through speakers, not in any language, but directly resonating inside their minds. "You have found the first. Others wait. The pattern must be complete. The choice is yours." And then silence. The sphere closed, seamless once more. Its glow faded. The room plunged into darkness. Part 21. The climax. In that moment, the world changed. The Bugosphere wasn't just a relic. It was a signal tower, a puzzle piece, one of 9 scattered across Earth and possibly beyond. And now it had spoken. Governments, corporations, and underground groups raced to find the others, driven by fear and ambition. Was this an invitation to join a galactic network, or a trap to test whether humanity was ready? No one could say, but one truth rang clear. The countdown had begun. So here we are, staring at a mystery that feels bigger than science, bigger than history, bigger than us. A perfect metallic sphere arrives in Colombia, silent and waiting. It opens only when we hum the right frequency, reveals only what it chooses to reveal. And when it finally does, it doesn't give us answers. It gives us choices. A network of 9. A pattern waiting to be completed. A face that wasn't ours. And a voice that spoke not in words but in resonance, vibrating directly through our thoughts. Is it a message? A warning? An invitation? Or maybe all 3? Whatever it is, the Bugosphere has changed the way we think about our place in the universe. We're no longer asking if we're alone. We're asking if we're being watched. And maybe, just maybe, if this is only the first of 9 spheres, then humanity has only seen the beginning. Take a breath, let your mind wander, and drift into sleep, knowing the cosmos may be far less empty than we once believed. If you want to keep exploring these mysteries with me, don't forget to subscribe and click on the next video waiting for you on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.